of your screen. So the Auckland regional coordinators, that's myself, Bex and Ange, have connected with Amanda, and we have talked about shared with her the garden to table kaupapa, and also shared some photos of some marakai, some school gardens. So she has an idea of the spaces that you're working with. A bit of disclaimer, so this talk is for you to gain knowledge and add to your kitty of tools and wisdom. It's an opportunity to learn and perhaps be inspired. However, Garden to Table is not advocating that we want everyone's gardens to be permaculture gardens. We just welcome opportunities to learn and share and be inspired and to connect. And when we connected with Amanda, we could see an alignment of our values. So in a moment, I'm going to share a document that will appear in your chat space, and Amanda will explain this. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our wonderful first speaker, Amanda Warren. So handing over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Candace. That was just in the nick of time. All my technology came together at the last minute. So hey, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well and safe in your bubbles. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share permaculture with you guys today. You're doing such an amazing job with Garden to Table. I've admired you afar for quite a long while. I'm president of my local garden club, which is near to Meadowbank, and we were lucky enough to have a visit a couple of years ago to the Meadowbank school, so I was really impressed with what was happening there. So I'm going to talk for around 20 minutes. I've got a couple of wee videos to share with you. My presentation is going to be aiming to really get the essence of what permaculture is across to you and set you up for any further questions. We have received quite a few questions from you, which were awesome, and it's helped me to factor those into what I'm going to talk about. And then I'm going to hand over to my tutor and mentor, Gunther Andrasco, who's going to then share with you some of his experiences with designing permaculture in schools itself. I'm also going to share with you something called the Ruth Stout Gardening Without Work method. It's the best kept secret in the world, and I'm sharing it like mad, and we'll find out what that is shortly. Okay, so don't know whether any of you know Jeff Lawton. If you don't, his permaculture videos on YouTube are well worth a look. He has some amazing stuff, and he said all the world's problems can be solved in a garden. Now, some people might sort of throw their eyes in their head at that and say, what do you mean? How can we solve, you know, global warming and peace and all of those things? But in actual fact, I think I can totally understand where he's coming from with permaculture. You can solve all the world's problems through a garden, and I'm going to invite you to think about that whilst Gunther and I are presenting, and see if that makes sense to you as well. So our objectives today are, first of all, to share the absolute joys of permaculture. It's something that I'm very passionate about. It's changed my life. Then, as I say, spread the secret of gardening without work, which I'm sure you'll be keen on. One of the questions was, how do we keep gardens going in non-term time? So we think we've got the answer for you there. And then make connections with you guys in something that we're calling our stakeholder guild, through an initiative, a movement we've started called Gift the Garden, and I'll explain a bit more about that right at the end. So, excuse me, what is permaculture? So permaculture is a design approach. So it's looking at your space and designing it to mimic natural systems, to take lessons from nature. Nature doesn't need weeding, feeding, maintaining. If you look at a forest, everything in the system does it naturally as part of its life. And so the design approach that we take is looking at how we can mimic that to reduce work and make a self-regulating system as much as possible to produce a yield, whether that yield be food or wood or just joy and happiness. that we're looking to actually create a yield from that. And through that system, the resilience of the system and the people who are taking part of the system increases, because the system builds and improves, rather than setting up a simple agricultural system where we have to go in each year and add more and more fertilizer, more and more chemicals, etc. It's the opposite of that. And I'm aiming through the principles now to just help you to understand how we do that, and to give you some good starters to get going yourselves. Having said that, you're probably doing an awful lot of this already, and it will be interesting in the chat later to find out what you are doing. So what are the key benefits of permaculture? Well, the food, once you set up the system, is truly abundant, and there shouldn't be a food scarcity if everyone had these principles, because nature wants to be abundant. It just needs us to get out of the way or design the system to allow it to be so. And we do less work because we allow nature to do it. We empower nature to do it. We design the system for nature to do it. And part of that is encouraging nature to do what nature does best. So encouraging life to thrive. And we work with all of the different creatures within our space. Building soil is a benefit, but it's also, for me, the number one call to action. We know that soil sequesters carbon, it captures and holds water. We know that across the globe we're losing our soil. And so in our garden spaces are a fantastic place where human beings can do what we do. The one thing we do better than nature and quicker than nature is build soil. A forest takes thousands of years, but we can do it in a compost bin in our back garden in a few weeks. Another benefit is around capturing and recycling energy and water. That's part of the key essence of what we're designing our system for. And that there's no waste, because nature doesn't have waste. Every output is another system's input, another creature's input. And it's naturally low carbon. I suspect a lot of the schools have low carbon goals. And it's beyond that. We actually reverse carbon, because soil is a carbon sink. And I'm loving at the moment taking biochar, charcoal out of my fire, my wood burner, putting it in the compost, knowing that that is holding and sequestering carbon into the soil and building the microorganisms. So we're very much working with nature. There are three key ethics, and you'll see this little diagram everywhere in permaculture, because we need a balance of all of these. It's not just about taking care of the environment. It's not just about taking care of people and growing food. It's about doing the both of those in balance. And then fair share is any surplus going back into the system, so that the system grows and strengthens. Working with nature, not against it. You may, I'm not sure of some of your backgrounds, but if you are involved in teaching, you may be familiar with looking at the system in nature. And I really like this little diagram. There's so much learning in permaculture for children. If you just imagine this one system, that just look at the dragonfly there. If the dragonfly were to go extinct, and I don't like focusing on the negative statistics, but we know that we have lost in some countries up to 70% of some of our insects since the war. Just imagine if the dragonfly was to go extinct. Well, you know, the salamander might eat something else, the mosquito, the trout might eat something else, but maybe the mosquito also goes extinct. Then the system is starting to become a bit frail. And so permaculture is working to bolster and improve and strengthen and increase that system, which means that our food is healthier and more abundant as well. So we have in permaculture 12 principles. Now, I don't have time in this presentation to go through all 12, but I'm going to pick on a few simple ones that I think you'll really like. And also, the 12 principles aren't individual, they interact and they work very much together. And I did suggests that you might want to have that handy. And if you haven't, don't worry about it, but go back to it later. And I think we can check out, you know, if we got a good understanding of how these principles interact. So the first one is that I learned really naturally, and I think this is great for children, is to observe first of all. The First Nation peoples here, the Maori, then the Waitaha, the Kumara growers, they spent a year in their young childhood of just being sent out to observe nature before they were allowed into the gardens. And a couple of things I noticed when I was observing my garden. One is that the silver eyes come down to my bird bath every day, and then they go around and pick off any aphids that are on any of the roses or the other plants. And so in understanding that, I can then interact and make sure that I've got more bird baths in my garden, I've got food that they like to eat, and so that I can really help them to do their job, which means that I don't have a pest problem in my garden. Capture and store energy and obtain a yield, I'm going to cover together. One of the little examples I like to use though is I used to pay a gardener a lawnmower to pick up all my cabbage tree leaves, and he charged me $10 for that. And then one day I kind of had a bit of an inspiration looking at them, and I thought, I wonder if these burn. And then I figured out that if you tie them up into a knot, and I then since learned that that's what the Maori did, is they make fire lighting faggots. So I now catch all my cabbage tree leaves, tie them in a knot, throw them in the back of the laundry, and then in the winter we use those as fuel all winter. So that's a good idea. Nothing is waste, everything is a yield, it has some use. Produce no waste, that naturally comes out of what we've been talking about, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail shortly. And then the other two that I want to cover off, again, I'm going to bring them together. Use and value diversity. So often we put our vegetable garden at the end of the garden or somewhere because we think it's ugly, and we separate it. And therefore, because it's separate, we have to do a lot of the work that nature would do for those plants, because it's separate from its natural environment. So integrate rather than segregate. And I'll give you some good examples and show you how you can do that. And Candace was great. She sent us some pictures of some of the awesome work that you're doing in Garden to Table across the schools in Auckland. And one of the things that I noticed is the opportunity there for doing even more, because we don't need raised beds. We can start a food forest on a lawn anywhere. And I'll show you some examples of that. And hopefully you'll get quite excited about getting out there with the cardboard and the compost and creating a new environment on your lawn. So I am denied about whether to put this diagram in, but I and don't try and read it all. I just want to use it as an illustration of the permaculture principles in action. In the modern world, on the left-hand side, to produce an egg, we have a lot of different systems going on. And if any one of those systems isn't there, then we're going to have a problem. So at the moment, I've had to order click and collect for my chicken food. And you can see that, you know, we need a truck, and we need the manufacturer of the truck, and we need all of those things just to produce an egg. So that's a lot of energy and a lot of process to go into creating an egg. The permaculture approach is to set up and design your space so that the plants provide the food, the chuck's manure provides the compost, provides the feed for the plants, the roof, and that's a little bit of industrial here to get the iron. The roof captures the rainwater that gives the chickens their water. So you can see the system is much more self-regulating. We still have to intervene and interact in some ways, but if there was a global oil crisis, then this system is still going to keep going. This system would grind to a halt. How you set that up and whether you can set that up is then part of the challenge, but hopefully that illustrates the difference between a permaculture approach and a normal modern gardening approach. I thought I'd just share with you, 3 years ago, I was involved with, this is one of my designs for Maracaibo Wirihana, which is in the Manurua High School. And it was a wonderful experience to work with the school and the Super Clinic and Middlemore Foundation. And the design is a community garden using permaculture principles. One of them we haven't talked about, but this is a rongoaf with Maori healing medicines, and we're using edge. We're creating as much edge as possible because diversity and abundance is often on the edge. Here we've got a whole stack of worm farms taking all the food waste from the super clinic, of which there is over a ton a year, into the worm farm then to feed the intensive farm, which feeds the school. And then there's an observatory learning area for the children, and they're slowly been hit by COVID quite strongly, but they've been doing some really good work here and getting this going. And I've put there the emphasis on beauty. For me, that's something that I always add into my permaculture work, because I think when you see something as beautiful, it awakens love in your heart and you actually feel like you want to care for it. So it's important that things are beautiful. Just checking the chat, see if anyone's asked me anything. Okay, so here is just a couple of little detail slides. This is the idea for the learning observatory for the children, that this is using permaculture patterning to have least paths. We've got the idea of having a water capture observatory. They can climb up, they can store vegetables in here. One of the key things about permaculture is everything should have at least 2 functions if it's in the system, and every system, every function needs at least 2 elements supporting it so that there's redundancy. Bear with me, sorry, my PowerPoint's locked up, there we go. And another little detail, I thought this relevant for the schools because it needs to be fun as well and enjoying, and art is so important, I think, for all of that. And so these ideas like using recycled bottles to create a greenhouse can be done in school with creative, using the water tanks to express art. Lots of ideas there. Okay, so hopefully at this point I've given an idea about the permaculture principles, and so now I'm going to run through and give you 5 simple ideas that you can do at home or in the school, and yeah, we'll take questions on these at the end. So picking up on those permaculture principles, one of the first ones, observe and interact. One of the things you can do, if you haven't, you've probably been doing this already, but I also did a regenerative design course last year with Regenesis, and that was phenomenal for teaching how to really understand your place, what's special about your place, discover your story of place together as a community, find your watershed. Here is Middlemore School's watershed, and you can see where it sits. I didn't know what a watershed was till I did that course, but you begin to understand how important that is for the community. We all live in a certain watershed. How does it help you to understand the sector that you're in? So if this little house here is what we're analysing, where's the wind coming from? How does the sun impact the garden? What are the microclimates? Where would you position which kind of garden? Some plants like a bit more shade than others, some plants like more sun. Have you got a heavy wind that's going to devastate that you need to maybe redirect? So really understanding your sector, the place, drilling down, looking at for me, I find it most valuable to look at the contours. Once I can see the contours of a place, then it almost begins to design itself. And this is a small garden that I'm working on designing at the moment. And so the front garden here slopes down. So what we've done here is we've created a path which gives a winding journey as the client wants to use it for ecotherapy, to pick through the plants. But the main thing here is that as the water hits the site, it's soaking in to these contour lines into the beds. So the more water we can capture in the winter, the more it's stored in the soil, the more we've built the soil, then the less we have to water in the summer. And that last year with the big drought we had and the water ban is really important. But can't wait to share Ruth Stout with you, because that will really help you to not have to water at all. So here's some ideas of patterns, using nature's patterns. Here, this is my garden. I've used the contours to terrace down the hill, and as the water comes down, nothing is wasted, it all gets soaked in. And these beautiful keyhole gardens are amazing, because you need very little path, you can always access. This is something called a herb spiral. It's well known in permaculture parlances. You get little microclimates all the way around for different kinds of herbs. Okay, so that's the first thing. Observe and interact and do a sector analysis. And it would be something awesome, I think, to take children through. You probably do a lot of that as well. Look at your soil, analyze your soil. I hadn't talked about that, but what kind of soil do you have? The second easy win is to just focus on building soil, and I'm sure that you're all doing that at the moment in your raised beds, but we can do this across every little inch that isn't covered in tarmac. Let's build soil. So lots of compost, have a worm farm, no dig. I'm saying to Gunter, I'm a confirmed no digger at the moment. I won't go into it, but it's all about the fact that there's a city going on underneath the soil. If we dig into it, we're interrupting the actions. If we place compost on the top, all the organisms and the worms come and dig the soil for us as they come to get the food. So, so chop and drop, things like comfrey is a great other green cover crops you can use. And then we'll have a look at the Ruth Stout method. Ruth Stout is something I learned at the Taranaki Garden Festival, which hopefully I'm going to in November again this year. There's a guy there who was, radishes were this big, I kid you not. And he just had hay everywhere. And I'll let the little video that I'm going to show explain that a little bit more. But let's see if I can get this one to work. This one is all about soil. So fingers crossed. If not, we'll just keep going.
If you're like most people, you're probably feeling a little hopeless about climate change and the damage we've done to our planet. Well, now there's a new way to look at climate change and how to deal with it that might just turn that hopelessness into hope. Climate change, as we know, is all about too much carbon in our atmosphere. But carbon is not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it, even us. The problem and the solution are simply a matter of balance. Let's step back and look at the 5 pools where carbon is stored on planet Earth. Starting about 500 million years ago, when plants first appeared on land, carbon began to cycle in an amazing balance between these pools, a balance that allowed for life as we know it to evolve. Then one life form, that would be us, figured out how to extract carbon from the fossil pool, which was pretty much a timeout zone for carbon. We've been burning it for energy, putting into play, and disrupting that balance. The way we manage land and do agriculture is moving even more carbon into the atmosphere. Specifically, we've moved 880 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is heating up the planet and destabilizing our climate. The oceans have absorbed a lot of this excess carbon, throwing off the ocean's balance, resulting in ocean acidification and accelerating a mass extinction of sea life. So in order to save life as we know it, of course we need to stop burning fossil carbon. The big question is, where do we put this excess carbon to get the cycle back in balance? The good news is that the answer is literally right under our feet. It's the soil. Plants, using sunlight and water, naturally perform photosynthesis. They pull carbon in from the air and turn it into carbohydrates, sugars. Then they pump some of these sugars down through the roots to feed microorganisms who use that carbon to build healthy soil. Voila, carbon moved. The plants pump it in and the soil stores it. Nature's living technology is amazing. Scientists have recently discovered that applying a thin layer of compost can help regenerate healthy soil, setting up an ongoing feedback loop that brings more and more carbon into the soil each year. Together, With other regenerative practices, like not tilling the soil, planting trees and cover crops, and planned grazing, we can build and retain billions of tons of soil carbon. This is carbon farming. This is regenerative agriculture. Unlike more carbon in the atmosphere, more carbon in the ground is good for us. It makes healthy soil, which is nutrient rich and full of life and holds way more water. This means more nutritious food and crops that are more resilient in the face of drought. That's good news for farmers, families, and everyone who eats. Remember this, the way we grow our food, fiber, and fuel either puts carbon up into our atmosphere or pulls it down into the ground. The regeneration of soil is the task of our generation. Our health, the health of our soils, and the health of our planet are one and the same. A little hopeless about climate change.
Okay, so I've just hope that I love that. It's just a very short video, and it really does bring it home, the hope that we have and the part that we can play in our home gardens in our cities as well, because there's a lot of space in our cities and our home gardens. I'm not going to talk too much about the soil food web, but hopefully by now you get it, that there's a lot going on in the soil and it's a living organism. It's not, I'm always amazed people call it dirt. It is actually living, and building it is really important. So I'm just going to share the Ruth Stout method through a little video that was made in my place, and seeing is probably better than me talking about it.
Gardens for well-being is not just the well-being of me or the people who own the garden, but it's the well-being of all the other creatures that live here as well. What enables us to do it is, first of all, using the Ruth Stout no-work gardening method, which is 6 inches of hay or compost at least on all your soil. So one of the key permaculture principles is to take care of your soil. Everything begins with the soil. A lot of people don't realize how many living organisms there are in the soil. And in this space here, in my 1/4 acre section, there's an elephant size of microorganisms living in my soil that needs to be fed all the time.
But Panda will sell bales from her farm. They're $25.
And so when you feed your soil with hay or comfrey tea, the soil is then feeding the plants. The microorganisms in the soil are feeding the plants.
Okay. And that's how I met Candace, when she came to get some hay for one of your projects there.
Gardens for well-being is not just the well-being of
losing the plot on my technology,
me or the people who own the garden, but it's the well-being of all the.
Go away, Amanda. Right, get back in, share again. Okay, so we've just got 2 final ideas that you can take away to share, and then I'm going to hand over to Gunter to give you some examples in schools. So I think you're getting the idea already about hay. Now there's lots of grass everywhere. We can grow it long. This is my berm. I created a yield here from growing it long, turning it into hay, put wildflowers in it so it looked pretty. And people are worried, is it going to look scruffy? Well, we mowed a nice strip around it so everyone can see it was being useful, and then we can get it straight onto the crops. Weeds are yields. I love making all sorts of foods at the moment with the onion weed. It's highly edible. It's a great substitute for spring onions, and the flowers are delicious. And I'm thinking you probably already do this, take the kids around hunting for different materials to put into your compost. So here's some ideas of what you can do. You can get really creative with letting your grass grow, and it becomes a fantastic habitat whilst you're doing it for wildlife. Okay, so next simple thing to do for yourself is the combination of using and valuing diversity and integrate, don't segregate, that's those two principles over here. So look after the birds, they work really hard for us. I learnt this to my peril when I covered up one of my front garden beds because my blackbird was merrily tossing out all the mulch looking for slugs, and it was messy. So I covered it up, and within 6 weeks I had a slug problem. I uncovered it, invited the blackbird back in, and just swept the mess. Lots of things we're doing with them. I'm going to talk about the gift the garden concept, is taking construction waste, making habitats for our insects. We rapidly need to boost the numbers of our insects. And one of the ways you can do this is create a food forest. Food forests are, we don't have to grow food in annual beds that we dig over and pull things out. We can get a permanent system going. This is a gorgeous one down in New Plymouth. And you can create this kind of food forest rapidly in a weekend with some cardboard, some deep compost and some hay or bark mulch. And that food forest will then grow and deliver for you for years to come with very little work. So the final idea is, and you're probably doing a lot of this as well, is just in any way you can capture and store energy in your space, in your place. And these are my bees capturing sunlight for me in the way of honey. I've just set up one of these maze little mini systems here. I'm going to link them all the way down the hill from my shed. Pop some comfrey in so it's also feed, solar, wind if you can, but there are lots of very simple ways. Just planting more trees captures and stores energy. So that's the 12 principles of permaculture that we visited, really the ones that I think are probably most important to look at initially. And yeah, so that observe, interact, look at your space, do a sector analysis, capture and store energy to obtain a yield, produce no waste, every input is somebody else's output and vice versa, integrate everything, make the whole school a food garden. I think that was what impressed me about the Meadowbank, was that every inch was gardened, and bring in that biodiversity and use it. And so that brings me to the end of the presentation from me about permaculture. Going on from that, and again, how I become involved with Candace, I'm involved in an initiative called Gift the Garden, and here's some of the organisations that are involved with it. And it's about rapidly bringing permaculture principles into gardens in Auckland. One of the big things is working with Naylor Love and the construction industry to take construction waste and use it to create structures and systems in the garden, and then building soil and really creating that biodiversity. So as you can see in the logo, we're going to be encouraging insects and biodiversity, letting our grass grow, and creating lots of food through sustainable permaculture systems. So turning lawn to lunch, waste to wealth, and nurturing with nature. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there and invite my teacher and mentor Gunter to come in and talk to you about what he's been doing. Thank you very much. Look forward to speaking to you at the end.
Thanks, Amanda. That was great. And it was really a really nice summary of things that are actually going on. And it's really nice to see all the different elements. So just to give a little background of who I am, first of all, I'm wearing two hats. One hat that I'm wearing is running workshops. I'm a permaculture designer and educator, and I run various workshops under the Resilient Living umbrella, and also have a construction company called Unique Outdoor Spaces. During that, like with Unique Outdoor Spaces, I have created a lot of different installations at schools. And like permaculture is an interesting question in itself. Like if you ask 15 people what the definition of permaculture is, you'll probably get 15 different answers. And in a way, permaculture is, it can look quite complicated and complex, but it's more or less a way of life and the way how you actually conduct yourself on the planet, and the way how you see things, and the way how you try to understand living systems, which we are a part of. We are part of a living system. And permaculture creates a bit of a framework to understand all these different living systems. But Amanda has talked enough about that. What I want to show you, I just want to bring some of what we heard, what Amanda was talking about, into the context of what's happening at schools and some of the work that I've done at schools. I want to first show you a video that I've put together from some different designs I've done for various schools. And I just pulled out relevant elements that actually relate to gardens to table. The other thing that I wanted to say before I start with that is I really like the whole garden to table concept. And I've done a lot of installations in schools that are not part of garden to table. Every now and then there is an overlap, and it just always makes me really happy, because then I can bring that link together with wherever that school is already at on their journey. So that's always a really great thing to do. I also had a look at the Garden to Table website, and there's just like ethically a lot of overlaps already happening anyway with permaculture and the permaculture way of thinking, the way how you want to integrate the larger whole of the community and create links. And so with that, I would like to, juggle some technical aspects. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Oh, here we go. What can I share? There you go. I think that's what I'll share. And so I'm playing you that video, and I just talk over it to explain what you can actually see, what is happening in there. So that's a design that I've been working on for a school in West Auckland, where we just create an entrance going into the school, and it changes a little bit from what is there. So in a way, the permaculture aspect of it is, there is like a lot of elements. Oh, I cannot stop that video when I want. Oh, here we go. There are a lot of elements like the posts that you just saw earlier on. They are part of an existing chain link fence that's there, but we will just dismantle part of it and repurpose the whole fence. So it ties into the principle of create no waste, where you actually try to reuse as much as is there, rather than just always creating new things. And this is the entrance area, and like where the link, where I can see a really strong link between garden to table and permaculture in itself, is actually the design approach. Like permaculture is a design modality, and very often there is a little bit of a disconnect going on. Like in some schools I've seen, oh, the garden, we'll just put it where it's not in the way. And I actually don't think a garden is ever in the way. Like if you make a garden a part of your life and your daily being, you create a different connection to the garden itself. So in this design, we created part of the garden to table right at the entrance of the school. And where it's actually the face of the school. That gate is it's a core 10 steel gate where you're coming into the school itself. All the trees there, they're not there at the moment. So some of these trees are, but a lot of them are going to be fruit trees that are planted amongst garden beds. So what you actually do with that is you create it's like making a statement. Here we go. Food is important for us, and how we live with it is important as well. Amanda was talking about various functions, like in permaculture. And that's where I feel like, permaculture takes out some principles, but it's a way how some people think already anyway. Like going away from having the garden beds in the last corner, having it at the entrance, you can then create yet another function apart from everybody that walks past your garden beds is connected by actually seeing what's going on. They see whether the things need harvesting, whether they need watering. People that are usually not connected get connected with it. And in this design, you can actually use the garden beds as a seating area as well. There are people coming into the school and they use that of actually sitting, having their lunches and hanging out. And that gives you a little bit of a picture of the whole design of the whole school. So far, we have done just one part of it, which is like from the gate to the main entrance to the school. From there, we go on to, that's actually Wairau Intermediate School. Of course, if we still have time, I can show you some pictures of that. It's sort of a combination of mud brick seating areas and plantings. And they have been designed as outdoor classrooms where there was a very barren area in the school where nothing was going on. So we created these terraces that the school can use as an amphitheater, and also in the back have outdoor classrooms with plantings where the kids can actually conduct themselves outside. That's another school at Te Mataranga in South Auckland, where we created like inside, it's like an industrial school building, and inside that school building, we created some wicking beds where you can have subtropical plantings that then tie into the, and they had a Samoan area in that school, and that subtropical planting area and the design work on the plant that tied into that. I had the children and the wider school community. I always try to open things up as much as possible, which then ties very well into your principle of bringing the school community in as well. And so it's not just, things are usually not created in isolation. You sort of have an idea and bring as much of the school community, the students, the teachers, the parents into the project as possible. And from there we went on, and this table, you'll see some pictures of that afterwards. The mosaic in there is actually representing the cultural aspects that are present at the school. And then from there you have life coming out of it. And again, that's the face of the school. As you're entering the school, you see something that's creative, that's beautiful, and that's alive. And from there, we sort of created yet another planting area inside the school. And this area was a very bland playground. And there was literally not a single tree in that whole area. It looked like a grass wasteland. And we created a lot of artistic structures, food forests that create windbreaks and that also give the children and the school community. It's a Decile 1 school. So I wanted to create something that even if, and it looked like the school was not really into gardening itself, but I wanted to leave something behind that grows better with time. Like sometimes I find, and you would know that very well, schools come alive with whoever runs a school, and vegetable gardens are systems. If they're not looked after or managed well for a while, then they just fall over. So part of my planting, I always like to create fruit trees as well and food forests. They sort of create quite a stable system in themselves. And if an area is neglected for a while, you can always come back to something that's already there. So with that design, we've created a lot of planting areas. This is yet another area as well. And it's like that the thinking is, when I create something, I feel like, the permaculture thinking within that is always, how can you produce something? How can you do something that actually nurtures the school, but in a way that it integrates into their life? So it's not feeling like an afterthought. That's a school on the North Shore where they actually wanted to have they had a big courtyard. You can see there is a flying roof going over a courtyard that's sort of semi-open to the outside. And we designed a stage into there, and all the furniture, everything is movable. So if they want to use it as a stage, they can wheel the elements away, but everything keeps on producing some food, or sometimes it's not food, it's whatever plants people can actually relate to. But it's just that element of create a yield, create some produce. And I tend to always strive for creating some artwork that the children can be a part of. And that way the children are always involved in it and contribute to it as well. On the same school, they actually wanted to have, they've got an amazing technology area. I mean, not quite sure what it's called. It's food tech, where they're doing the cooking outside their classroom, where they have got the kitchen. They have got some amazing gardens, and they are just flexes to represent greenery. I didn't want to do a planting plan in there. And they are all garden beds. So from the school where this woman walks inside, this is actually the kitchen. And then I designed these tables outside the kitchen. So because they wanted to be able to run the whole school also as a cafe for fundraisers. And so we made all that furniture, and again, that's movable, so they can have a lot of flexibility in there. And then designed a wood-fired pizza oven in there, and so they can actually run big events. The big plant, as you see, with the 100-Wasser type paintings on it, they're old broken concrete culvert pipes. So that's repurposed as well. And from there, all the lecturing area that we'll get to soon, that's all mixed with planting. So I really like the idea of having outdoor classrooms where your food production and your plants actually become a part of your outdoor classrooms as well. And that incorporated with plantings, whether it's revegetation or your food production, veggie garden beds, that's a part of that as well. And I think, oh, that's it on the slideshow. So that's just to give you a little bit of an idea of seeing gardens, and that's where I can see a very strong link to garden to table, where I've often seen in various, not just schools and areas and people's at home, it's a way of thinking to actually, we'll stop that one, to see your gardens as an integral part of your design. One of the questions that you asked was what relevance permaculture has for gardens to table. And I think there is a big relevance is actually in the design aspect. And if you understand the connections and how things link up, that could be really helpful for garden to table. And we're actually on 5 to 12. I've got a whole bunch of photos and that I wanted to show you, but we wanted to have questions and answers as well. And I don't want to take up more time than you have, than whatever you have carved out already for yourself. So what would you like to do? Would you like to see some photos, or would you like to go straight into questions and answers?
Does anyone have any questions at the moment? Just feel free to unmute yourself. If not, then perhaps you can start sharing some photos, and I'll put up some questions in the chat. And if
okay. Here we go.
I've got a request for more photos, Gunther. Your designs are so beautiful.
Oh.
Just sitting here, so amazed.
Okay, well. Oh, can you actually see that slideshow? You probably can't. I have to get out of that, I have to share something else. Oh, here we go. That's how it works. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. So it's just a few elements where I sort of want to link in the permaculture design approach in itself. And like what I've done there, that's in the DSL 1 school in South Auckland. And we are creating a food forest, a massive planting that is part of that of that whole design process, of the whole design there. And I had 35 cubic meters of bark chips delivered. And I always think like schools are quite amazing. Like schools have, like that school has got 450 children, and every one of these little children in there have got energy to burn up. They spend that energy somewhere. It's like a big anthill. And I felt like, how can I actually use the energy they have? So I got 5 wheelbarrows. Every lunchtime and every morning tea time, we had 3 children to 1 wheelbarrow, and they can, no tools, they just have gloves. They scrape the bark into the wheelbarrows and move it around under the trees. That's sort of one of the areas that has been all barked by the children. Out of the 35 cubic meters of bark, 20 cubic meters were shifted by the children with little hands, scraping things into wheelbarrows, carting them around. And it was, I mean, I sort of felt like, you know, it was really exciting for the children. They really looked forward to it, and it was like a privilege for them. And it took quite a long time before it got boring. And when it got boring, after about 3 weeks, I mean, I spent a lot of time in that school. I spent close to 2 years in there doing various things. And so after about 3 to 4 weeks, that exercise became a little bit boring for them. So I hired a digger and finished it off with a digger in half a day. But that's sort of beside the point. It's a matter of actually exciting the kids and getting the kids into that. And that's sort of part of that school ground, the way it was. And around the whole playground area, we have planted a big orchard, which are now mature trees. That was like 6 years ago. And then in other areas, we just, I'm not sure, I think Amanda also talked about guilds, which are plants that go together. And amongst their citrus trees that we just planted out, and amongst these citrus trees under them, we just planted Mediterranean herbs, and that sort of creates a guild of plants that go together. Sort of permaculture is quite big on actually creating relationships between plants, relationships between living systems that we are out there. And I always see the community is a part of the big living systems as well. And so that's just some photos of how that rolled out. There was in a, you know, Amanda also talked about microclimates. Where this picture has been taken from is in the corner of a building where the sun comes in quite strong, and it made the area really hot and uncomfortable to be in. So we created a subtropical planting with bananas and pawpaws and an understory of pepinos and other small plants. And it just became a really attractive area of that really hot microclimate. The trees cooled the area down, and I created some seating area there as well. So it just became a really nice area for the kids to sit and hopefully get some trees from. That's the table you saw in the design. And so that's all been done by the children. So we worked together with the art department and decided, you know, what can be done. And so the children represent in that design all the different cultures they have in there. And that's the kids just being part of creating that mosaic. And
Wow.
that's sort of how it sits in that area. The planters that you saw before, there is one right at the end, and it's sort of like a big corridor. And that's one of the kids sitting there. That's some artwork behind there that we created
Wow,
with the
that's so
children as
beautiful,
well.
Gunther. I'm just aware, sorry to interrupt you, but it's just gone 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
So if people need to leave, then that's kete pai, that's fine. But we do have some questions that are popping up on the chat. So can you see them? And
I can. We can go straight into the questions.
yeah, that would be great. So I guess starting from, what would be the first step to take into permaculture gardening?
Do you want to take that, Amanda?
Yeah, I think if you stop sharing your screen, Gunther, I'll just pull back up the summary of the first steps that we talked about earlier on. And I thought you might like this idea as well. Every single building in the school being an insect hotel. That's what this is here. So the first steps, I think, things that you can get on with immediately is really doing your sector analysis. Get Auckland geomaps and plot the contours and look at where the sun comes and begin to understand your place, and look at, is your veggie garden actually in the right place? So there's a bit of work there that can be done with the children. Build soil. That's just get the hay, throw the hay on. It'll stop you having to water in the summer. I didn't water my tomatoes at all last year and I won a prize for them. So I can't, and I think Candace, you've just got some hay, so I can't say enough about that. Yeah, I think then just yeah, I'll probably stop there. Is there any other questions?
Where can you get more information on courses? I just popped a link into there.
Oh, good. I was trying to copy that in, but I couldn't. It was
wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you can go in there. We're waiting for beehives for our school. What is the best area to install them in concern about kids and neighbors?
Yeah.
Did you want to take that, as you have bees in your backyard?
I can take that. I'm a beekeeper myself. I have been for about 5 years, and I find the bees are very docile. I've only been stung 3 times in 5 years, and all of those times were when I accidentally squished a bee somewhere. But I've designed a platform so that my bees go over my head, because I've got a garden coming down. So the ideal place is you need them in sun, but point the hive somewhere where it's not going to be in a walkway, because they need to have a clear space and you don't want them tangling in someone's hair. Where you're getting your bees from, I think have them help you to site the bees in the best place when they come. If you want any help with that, then just give me a call. I'm happy to come and help. But I think the people who bring your bees would be really helpful with that too.
Yeah, there's quite a lot to know about just the flight path and how bees are usually behaving. Another one that's quite big is when bees fly away, there is an area of about 30 meters past the beehive where they like to, they drop stuff, like, and you do not want to have that over a car park where they actually drop bee pollen over the cars or over the neighbor's washing, for example. And what resources could I recommend to help administrators of a school understand the benefits of applying permaculture principles to their school? It's all education, isn't it? And what resources? There are, what I would recommend on that, I mean, first of all, there are lots of permaculture related videos on YouTube, and like Jeff Lawton does a really good series, and we could actually post some relevant links to you. Apart from that, if you have somebody in your school be dedicated to do a permaculture course, it actually creates that understanding. Like sometimes it feels like, oh, I can pull bits and pieces out from the whip, but it just quite often does not really make cohesive sense. And because permaculture generally is like quite a holistic system. So it really depends how deep you want to go. And
perhaps they could go and visit one of your schools that you've done some work in, Gunter, where you've designed permaculture gardens and design work.
I think the best understanding generally you actually get from really applying yourself, and another one, a good place to go and visit, because quite often when I leave a place, how it is run afterwards then depends on how the school is run. Like quite often you've got change in management, things really thrive or they don't. One place like within the Auckland area that's really great to visit is Kelmana Gardens. They're really good. Another thing that's really good to visit is Amanda's Friday workshops, because you get an amazing view of what's going on. And like you can speak to that. And otherwise you can pick lots of courses that are out there.
There's also a lady called Lucy Pearpoint has started a urban market garden in Glen Innes here, just up the road, and she's using permaculture principles at the back. She's been gifted a piece of land at the back of the doctor's surgery. That's another great place to visit. And as Gunter said, once a month, not during COVID, I ran a workshop here, which is 10 till 2, which teaches the basic principles. This is an awesome book. I've just put it in the chat. I absolutely love this book. It's full of beautiful pictures, Gaia's Garden, and it's a great way of learning, picking up hints and tips about permaculture. But for me, I learn the most by visiting people's gardens, and Kalmana Gardens. Can't wait to go to Taranaki and do the sustainable backyard trail. I learned heaps from that. Yeah.
Cool.
Resources on guilds. I have a compendium that was compiled by Robina McCurdy from Golden Bay, and they are tree crops, berries and vines for New Zealand, and that tells you all the different growing conditions, temperate and subtropical climate. If you want to, that's to answer the question about guilds. If you want to have a copy of that, you can contact me and I can pass one on for $15. It's a really good resource. We used it at all our courses for actually creating planting guilds and give you a bit of an idea. So that could be a good one for that.
And you've reminded me there, Gunter, about I've recently joined something called Tree Crops Association.
Yep.
That's an amazing place. Once a month they're meeting, and the last time I went, 51 different fruits and crops were laid out on the table from the people's gardens, and that was in winter. That was in July. So that's a great resource as well to meet people who understand trees and food forests.
Wonderful.
Another question, we only have X area to put into a garden, which is out the back of our school. Can we still develop a permaculture garden? I always believe if you find, you need to know how well that can be managed. There was one school I went to and they said, oh, we want to put that garden right up the top. And if the teachers that are running it can actually create enough momentum to give the kids a reason to go there on a regular basis, or however it works, then it can work. Generally, I feel it's really nice if everybody can be in touch with the garden. And so out the back, I'm always reluctant at out the back if I don't really know what out the back really means. And another question that I had was, somebody asked what you can do about the garden during the school holidays. And I always believe, like, first of all, if you follow what Amanda recommended with having a lot of mulch there, and that gardening method actually keeps a garden quite stable for a long time. But the other thing that and school holidays, like especially the summer holidays when it's really hot and dry, are very long. And I can see gardens quite easily falling over in that period of time. So one thing that could be really good too, which ties into your values of garden to table, is to actually grow the school community, to have people outside of the school community starting to use the gardens as well. And then if you have community buy-in, then you might actually get people from outside the school itself come into the school gardens and use it.
Wonderful. I've got a question. I'm just thinking, because it's lockdown and we're not allowed to go into school grounds at the moment. So by the time we get back to our gardens, there'll be lots of things going on. They could be quite overgrown. We might come back to a lot of produce, a lot of things gone to seed. So yeah, I guess when we do go back to these gardens, yeah, do you have any guidance or advice, you know, with a permaculture lens on, like how to approach this? Or yeah, just thought I'd ask that.
Do you want to take that, Amanda?
Yeah, well, look, the first thing I'd say is if you've got anything growing like cauliflowers or cabbages, and if they've maybe start to look like they've gone to seed, don't pull them out. Just slice them off and you'll get 3 new ones. And I've kept my cauliflower going for months like that last year, so it'll keep giving you a yield. And have a look at what's growing, and that'll analyze it, and that'll give you an idea of what your soil's doing. You can look at your weeds and actually figure out what you need to do to your soil. And I would suggest that don't pull the weeds out. Put hay or any kind of mulch you can get on top of them, and that will kill them and they will then feed the soil. So really use this opportunity that the garden may have got away from you a little bit, but actually it's created some living mulch. So that's a start. I could say more.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm just aware of the time. We're nearly at 12:15, so I think we should probably wrap it up. What we can do is do a post webinar email, just a summary of the information, and maybe we might be able to answer some of those other questions that we had submitted in more detail. And also we'll provide those links that have been shared in the chat. So if no one else has got any more questions, we might just leave it there. But before we go, I'd just like to virtually present. This is our Garden to Table Bounty cookbook.
I've got that.
To our 2 presenters today. Do you already have one?
Oh, sorry, you're presenting it to us. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that book.
Yes, so we'll be sending a copy to both you, Gunther and Amanda. So thank you so much for your time. I've learned so much. I'm really inspired to get back into the school garden, but also my home garden, and apply all those easy, tips that we can easily get into those 5 simple steps. So we'll just end with karakia. So I'll just share my screen. Ki runga, ki raro, ki roto, ki waro, leoria, ki to, te rangi marie. From above, below, inside and outside, may peace find us together. Kia ora whānau. Thanks everyone for joining us. Stay safe everyone. Kia kaha. Stay in touch.